Hi there. I'm so happy you're here. Here's what you'll gain by listening to the very last second of this conversation with one of my longtime mentors, Ralph Fletcher. Through my conversation with Ralph, you'll learn why his concept of greenbelt writing provides essential creative space for students to develop their authentic writing voice through choice and joy. It serves as a necessary complement to more structured and academic writing programs that we're seeing prevalent in schools today. You'll leave the conversation understanding why choice is fundamental to developing writers, why joy and pleasure are critical elements in writing development, and why teachers should validate and affirm student initiated writing. Stay with us. I'm so excited to have you join our conversation. This is Solutions Coaching and Teaching Strategies, the podcast that extends education beyond the classroom. A show that offers educators and caregivers strategies to try right away and ensure every student receives the inspiration and support they need to thrive. I am Olivia Wall, and I am humbled and honored to have Ralph Fletcher as a guest today. Let me tell you a little bit about Ralph. Ralph Fletcher has written many books for young readers and writers, as well as books for writing teachers. His most recent picture book is beautiful. It's The World's Loneliest Elephant. It's illustrated by Naoko Stoop. Ralph visits schools and speaks at educational conferences around the U.S. and abroad, helping teachers find wiser ways of teaching writing. Our conversation today will focus on his book. I have it right here. It's so vibrant and beautiful, what we need these days. Joy Write, Cultivating High Impact and Low Stakes Writing. We are going to zoom in, Ralph. I asked you to speak to the concept of greenbelt writing because I think our kids need this, and let's face it, teachers need this now more than ever. Welcome. I also want to, just as a side note, your nature photography inspires me endlessly when I'm on social, and I just had the gift of sitting in your keynote session on a Saturday morning at CCIRA, and you put up a gorgeous photo of a tree and still waters with mountains behind it. And I've written 3 different iterations of a response to that photo. And I've landed on a blue Post-it that I go back and look at often to remind me of what I need to be thinking about these days. So yeah, I feel like your photography is a form of greenbelt writing in its own way. Interesting.
That is interesting. I never thought of that before, but and maybe we get a chance to come back to the photography later on in the session.
I would love to. I would love to. So, with your books lining my professional shelf, years of work, who is a researcher that you're leaning on more than ever with your writing these days?
Well, one writer that I admire a lot, and he's a friend of mine's, or certainly a colleague, is Matt Glover, and he has a book that I was looking at called Craft and Process Studies, and he in that book he really advocates the importance of teachers letting kids choose the genre that kids write in. Like a lot of times in school, and we'll get the whole idea of choice. Probably that'll be the main theme of our talk today. But in many classrooms, the students kind of go through a series of units that are predetermined and they're top down. In other words, they're decided by the teacher. And I can see some value in that, but I agree with Matt that sometimes there's value in also letting students choose what genre they want to write in.
Yeah.
I'll give you a quick example of that. Let's just imagine that you wrote a piece. You went to an island in the Caribbean and you fell in love with it, and you started thinking about writing. You can fall in love with a person, but you can also fall in love with a place. So you started thinking about okay, so falling in love with a place, what could I do with that? And does that feel? And then so if the genre is already determined by the teacher, I think that the student doesn't get the chance to see what would be the most natural genre for that piece. So would it be a short story? No. Would it be a poem? For me, if I had that idea, I might follow it to maybe an essay in the travel section of the Sunday newspaper. Most magazines, most newspapers have a travel section, and they do have like essays, sometimes, travel problems or whatever. But the idea of falling in love with the place might fit there. So I think there's value in letting the student, him or herself, think, how am I going to follow this to the appropriate genre? That's empowering, I think.
I would agree. And since seeing you speak, you also reminded me of my own practices as a classroom teacher, and then what I tried to advocate for as a collaborative coach in school districts. Something that I always encourage teachers to build in between their prescribed units of study was at least a week of wiggle room, of genre choice. And it was always fascinating for me, if they were wrapping up an informational unit of study, to see the ways that children would play with taking the topic that they may have taught their readers about, but unpacking that through story, unpacking that through
Yeah.
poetry. I see what you're speaking to is much more, I believe, considering audience and the best way to reach that audience or convey that thinking. And that's different than what I'm saying. And I think both there's time and space, but just choice, it's critical. And I'd love for you also to speak to what's gone awry outside of the prescribed curriculum. What do you feel has gone most off track with writing these days?
Yeah. Before I do, I have to say I like your phrase, "a week of wiggle room." I think that's interesting. Um, so, first of all, as anybody who's been involved with education as a teacher and probably as a parent too, you can see that there are pendulums in education.
Yes.
If you have a student, a child who's 20-ish, you may remember that when your kid was little, the schools were espousing whole language, where there was a lot of just immersion and just reading to kids. And the idea was that students would pick up, reading skills and comprehension just by being saturated and marinated in good books. And now, because of science of reading, which is another whole movement, and it's another whole podcast, which I'm sure you'll tackle somewhere else.
Yes.
It's much more. The movement has been much more toward stricter phonics, systematic teaching, and less trust that kids would just absorb it. So, obviously, we're not talking about reading today, but in terms of writing, I think that there's been a swing back from more open-ended writing, more choice. The writing workshop as being a place where kids can do the writing that they need to do.
Yeah.
And now there's a little bit more sense, and maybe a lot more sense, that that teachers need to be giving more direct instruction and leading them through a lot of genres that they're going to need. Now, there's a couple of things that play into that. One of them is Common Core. And Common Core is much more about the writing the kids are going to need. And frankly, it's really much less about expressive writing. It's more about academic writing. And the chief author of that has been quoted as saying that in the real world, you find out that nobody really cares what you think about something. It's more like, what does the writing itself think? And I don't agree with that. But
Yeah.
the point is that I would just say this, Olivia, that I think that the writing in school has become more academic. And, I was thinking about that movie with Jerry Maguire, with Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
And at one point he says to his athlete that he's representing, Cuba Gooding, he says, that is not what inspires people. And I think that when you think about children being pushed to do a lot of academic writing, compare and contrast, essay writing, response to literature, instead of like writing about the things that they care and they're passionate about, I think that's been a turnoff. And so, if I just may go a little bit further on this, the other thing that's happened is there's a proliferation of commercial writing programs out there now.
That's my fear. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I understand why that's happened, but I think that we talk about box programs. You open up the box and the teachers all get the manual. And one of the words that teachers hear a lot is the word fidelity,
Yeah.
which is, probably a good word in a marital sense, but in terms of programmatic learning, it means that the teacher really is cautioned not to stray too far from the program. And so, and I just want to say, I'll get on and off my soapbox here, but I do think that when we talk about a box program, one of the problems is that the teachers feel boxed in, and as a result, kids feel boxed in.
Yes.
The kids don't really have a chance to explore their passions, their identities, the things that really move them, and maybe the things that they write about when they're not in school too.
Well, and that's what I adore about Greenbelt writing. And to pivot, if you're a teacher in a school district and if you're not tenured, there's that pressure to
Sure.
follow and toe the line.
Absolutely.
And yet I believe that teachers also hold great autonomy and agency when we see the possibility and what can we control. Yes, we have a scripted curriculum. None of those scripted curricular box programs run every week of the school year that I've seen in my research. There is wiggle room. And so what I saw that Greenbelt can offer is an opportunity is how can we celebrate writing for writing and joy, and nurture that inspiration for our children. I actually posted some pages in your book because I love that you have captured the essence of Greenbelt because you did research on what a Greenbelt actually is. So is it okay if I read just an excerpt?
Sure.
I'm putting you on the spot. So this is on page 38. A greenbelt, sometimes called a greenway or a green wedge, is an invisible line designating a border around a certain area, preventing development of that area and allowing wildlife to return and be established. You go on to say, it's a quote from John Carroll, who's a professor at the Natural Resources at the University of New Hampshire. Greenbelts create a passageway allowing species to move from one habitat to another. That's critically important for the survival of those species. And when I read that, I thought, yes, there's so many parallels. So can you speak to that? And also, what is Greenbelt writing?
Sure. So it's funny that you mentioned that. Sometimes, like when you write a book and then you move on to other projects, you sort of forget different parts of it. And John Carroll is actually a neighbor of ours, and in another part of town here. He doesn't live as much close, but he's a retired professor, and that's a really interesting quote. I think that's a very telling quote.
I agree.
Yeah. So I think that we have, going back to the metaphor of building and communities and land use. We have a lot of development, and we need development. We need schools, we need hospitals, we need places to buy our food. I probably have to remind myself that the suburban sprawl isn't all bad, because we need things. In fact, in the United States now, we have, as you know very well, we have a shortage of housing too.
Yes.
So, but at the same time, there's an erosion that happens in terms of quality of life. There's more pollution, there's more, runoff, and there are some species of animals that can survive in that really more domesticated landscape, but there are some that can't. And it's funny. Like, I think that really what's happened is that in the curriculum and writing in school, it's become more developed. There's been a lot of trees that have been cut down. A lot of wildness has been lost. And to really be candid, I think that a podcast like this, we can just put our cards on the table. And
yes,
one of the beautiful things is that nobody has to agree with everything that we say. But there are some kids, even in this more developed and academic environment in writing, who can survive fine. And, honestly, I probably would have been okay. I was the kind of kid that was pretty compliant. I could sit there and do what the teacher wanted. If she wanted me to do it this way, I could do it this way. If you wanted it this way. But there are a lot of kids that are not, just like there are a lot of species that are struggling.
Yes.
And so a green belt is, to me, and I'm thinking about when I met you in Colorado. I don't think I said this, but I just want to say it now that I think it's a compromise in a way. You know, it acknowledges and recognizes that in many school districts, teachers and kids are dealing with a more academic and more it's more programmatic and
Yeah.
less open ended. But even if you feel like you have to teach that way, as you said, the teachers who were not tenured, particularly, even if that's true, I think that there needs to be some time for the kids to just like do their own kind of writing. And so I'm advocating that we teachers think about creating some green spaces, which are opportunities for kids to do the writing that they want to do. And that's totally open ended. It's kind of like it's wild. And, it's my friend Barry Lane, he defined it. It's funny when I came up with this idea, but Barry liked the idea and he said, yeah, greenbelt writing is the writing kids love to do when no one's looking over their shoulders.
Yes.
So I think it's a chance, and that's an interesting thing is like, we're not looking over the kids' shoulders. Although, as we talk about a little bit more, I do think that there's ways parents, adults, teachers can affirm it and validate it for the kids too. But it's Olivia, it's one of these things, of course, that I could talk about for hours. But I will say this that just as you when you read that definition, when you like if if you and I would go out to a green space together, we would we'd probably park at some parking lot, and then at some point as you walk in, it starts to feel different. There's not walkways, there's not maybe there's some basic facilities, but it's pretty much you're kind of going back into a wild nature spot. And I think that when kids do this kind of writing, it really needs to feel different for them. It really needs to feel like we're writing. It's not like school writing. We don't have to follow the same rules or procedures, although they may decide to. And also, a teacher may see something that kids are doing in their greenbelt writing
Yes.
and say to themselves and say to the kids, what you're doing there is something that we could really pull into our writing workshop and talk about it. And this is something you could do in all your writing. I mean, I think it's rich for the kids, but it could be rich for the teachers too.
You're walking in my mind because that's exactly what happened. I've shared with you that my younger son, when he was in fourth and fifth grade with a group of friends in the after school program, started a series, Two Idiots That Changed the World. And lack of a better title, it's apt for fourth and fifth graders, I suppose, but it was phenomenal. And it's a comic strip. And it took great trust for them to start bringing this folder that started small and then grew with all of these strips and pieces of paper to show their teacher during the day. And what that teacher did, she is phenomenal. She did exactly what you just said. She looked through, first of all, she had a wonderful sense of humor. She still does. And that's why I love her extra. She read these comics and was just in tears laughing. So they got to see that response to their writing.
Yes.
And then she also saw the wit, the satire, the humor, the deep level of understanding that these children had about the world around them that never, I don't believe it would have been seen in the light it was if they hadn't have trusted her to bring that writing in. So I think there's vulnerability, not just for the children, but for grownups, that they have to really welcome writing that's happening outside. And that's what we want. We want reading happening outside of school. We want
Yep.
writing happening outside of school. So when she opened the classroom to that type of writing, it showed her how this group of writers in the fourth and fifth grade, they were collaborating and they were giving each other feedback. No, switch this, change this, in ways that I don't think we always expect children to do. And boy, they can. And that's why it's incredible to me.
Yeah. I mean, you said a lot there that I want to respond to. One of the things that I was struck by when you were talking is you talked about the wit, the satire, and the humor.
Mhm.
Um, by the way, I'm just curious, were these boys?
Yes,
Yeah. Um, so, I don't know if you know my book on boy writing.
I do.
Yeah. And one of the things that when I was talking to Tom Newkirk, who's a kind of expert in this area too, he wrote a
Yes.
wonderful book called Mistreating Masculinity. He said in his book, the central genre for boys are satire and parody.
Mhm.
Boys love to take a form and twist it in some way.
Yes.
And I think you can almost make the argument. I mean, obviously, we want kids to learn conventional ways to write things, but I think you could almost make the argument that when kids can kind of play with the genre and twist it and turn it, that almost shows that their mastery over it
I
too.
agree. Yes.
So, but when you were talking, I was also struck by, and it kind of made me sad to think of it, is like when you think of the units that are sanctioned in school, I don't think there's much humor allowed.
No, I agree.
And humor, is, man, talk about the secret sauce. I think that, for all writers, not just fiction writers or poets or movie script writers, but I think that it's something that's so important in all writing. And you made me realize, which I find this stimulating, made me realize that the Greenbelt writing also includes and really welcomes that humor, that aspect of humor.
It does. It does.
Um, you know, um, I think that the teacher that you describe did a really good job of receiving it, and that means like taking it for what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take a wild guess. It probably wasn't perfect. You know what I mean? It was probably kind of messy. There were probably misspellings, but I think it's important that you affirm what kids are doing and try to look at the glass being half full. Well, maybe we'll get to that, talking about what are ways that we can affirm and respond to this kind of writing so that we let the kids know that it's valuable and it's a valuable experience for them.
Well, and I think that's a good segue because if I'm a teacher in the classroom, as I've said, no scripted curriculum, no boxed program has every week accounted for. And I also, when I am looking at those programs, I'm meeting with teachers to say if this is a menu of potential lessons within a genre or within a mode of writing that we're teaching, which do you feel are critical based on what you know about your writers, and which could be for a small group or a one-on-one conference? And so that's a way you can also peel back the layers of these curricula. It's not every day slogging through day one, day two. You can look at the offerings as possibilities, but not all for a whole group. Because if we're not driving our writing instruction by the needs of our children, then I don't know what we're doing. But that idea of being affirming while we're still coaching students as writers, I think I also would love for you to speak to how do we incorporate this in your view or scheme of a year as teachers?
Yeah. So I think of it as something that is parallel to the regular writing curriculum, and it's when I think about this stuff, it's kind of bittersweet to me in the sense that um, if I would describe to you what I have seen in terms of Greenbelt writing, and this kind of resonates with what you said about your son's experience. What I realized that the qualities that are there are things that once upon a time were more present in a regular writing classroom, like
Yes.
the way I would describe a writing workshop. So, and I would love to fight that battle too, and I still do. I think that we still need to have a lot more choice in the writing classrooms. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I think that I I want kids to do this kind of writing alongside the other kinds of writing that they're doing. So if it's not like instead of, but it's ongoing, and um, I kids like they do it at lunch, they do it. When they have some downtime, they do it after school, or they do it on a rainy day when the kids have no recess, and the teacher kind of recognizes it, and and gives them, it's funny, even like as kids get older, they don't seem like that they care, whether you like it or not, but they do care.
They really care.
They
Actually,
really
yeah.
care, and they really notice it. And there's something, sometimes there's even little nonverbal things that we do that we can kind of dismiss, or we roll our eyes or we sigh, and kids really pick up in that stuff. So I think that it sort of starts with the teachers kind of examining their own beliefs and sort of say, if do I value this kind of writing? Because if I could just make my little sales pitch for it for second year, I think what you're going to be, you know, I don't think you can get better at anything unless you do it a lot.
I agree.
And that's true with, you and I could go down the list, whether it's skiing, whether it's playing pickleball, whether it's cooking. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell famously talked about the 10,000 hours,
Right.
right? And I don't know if it's 10,000 hours, but it's certainly quantity, volume. And so one of the things that Greenbelt writing contributes to is volume. Kids are writing a lot, and that's really important. If kids are going to be good at anything, they've got to write a lot. So that's one thing. They're also working on their stamina, and stamina, like the way I think of it, and I got this idea from Katie Wood Ray. Katie Wood Ray, in terms of stamina, Katie Wood Ray talks about two kinds of stamina. One is the stamina to stay with an idea during one sitting, like, and then the other stamina is staying with a piece of writing over time. Kindergarten kids in early first grade, they tend to write for a session, then they're done, and they're done with a piece, and then they start another piece tomorrow. I mean, I'm generalizing, but as kids get older and they understand that you can stay with an idea for a while. And I mean, I'm working on a book now. It's going to take me, months to finish. So I've got
Right.
to, it's the stamina that go. So I think that that's an important factor, that they feel that stamina. Um, they also, two more things. One of the things is that they collaborate. You mentioned that earlier. And, collaboration is one of those funny things. And I think it's a paradox in a way, because in a way, I do think writing is one of those individual things where you kind of go inside your head. And yet, kids are also in a community of writers, and they work with each other. And, one of the things that the business community has taught us, they want people that can work together on something. So, there's four of us together. We get together and we talk about, we read a report, we write a report, and we synthesize our ideas. And I think that there's value in having kids work together. There's probably more value than we realize. Sometimes it looks like one kid's doing all the work and the other kid's just sitting there watching. But I think there's a lot of parallel play, a lot of metacognition going on, a lot of watching somebody else scaffold it. So the collaboration piece is important. And the last thing I would say is the P word, pleasure. I think you alluded to this earlier. If kids enjoy reading, they'll read at home. And I think you could almost evaluate a good reading program by, do the kids read at home?
100%.
And I
Yes.
would say the same thing with writing. If they
I
enjoy
totally
writing, they'll
agree.
write at home. And
Yep.
if they don't enjoy it, they won't write at home. They don't enjoy reading, they won't read at home. So pleasure seems like a kind of a loosey-goosey, 1960s California beanbag thing. It seems like non-rigorous,
Right.
but I think that you know, choice has been really squeezed out of the writing curriculum because of these programs we're talking about. The kids don't have a lot of choice, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit, if I may. But I think also pleasure's been squeezed out too. And I mean, it's funny, this booking I'm working on right now, the chapter I'm really working on is that I think we need to promote pleasure in writing, in the writing classroom. And how do you do that? I mean, and by the way, writing's not always pleasurable. I'm sure there's times that you and I both, that we have to write something, we're not loving it. We're loving finishing it.
Right. We're loving finishing it. Ralph, I want to say, after I left your session, I also started to reflect back on my years in classroom settings with kinder through second graders, as well as intermediate. And I started to think about how did I carve space for greenbelt writing? I just didn't call it that. And I thought back, especially with my work with kindergarten, most of my class was bilingual. And we had centers. And so I had a center that happened every day, year round, and it was choice writing. And it was fascinating. I remember I went to Lowe's and got a mailbox and I had letter paper, all different paper choices. And every day there would be different groups of children that would beeline to the writing center, and it was completely open choice. And what I'm seeing a trend right now with these programs that are being implemented, station center work is coming back into popularity. If I were a classroom teacher, I would capitalize upon that and make sure I had a writing station, open choice genre available every single day to my children, especially at K to 2. And then I thought, I remembered you brought this back at grades 3 through 5. I had writing notebooks were everything in my mind. And we, for collecting and developing and just nurturing our ideas, I remember I had a fourth grader approach me and say, I know we're in the middle of narrative. I really want to play around with how I could try this in different genres, different modes of writing. And I said, okay. And so we were playing around. And I said, what if you stapled a notebook, another composition book to the back of this? And that became your out of genre exploration, whatever you want to write notebook. And then your in class genre notebook, whatever we're doing, would be in front. Other kids saw that happening, and this student was pleased as punch that they had that autonomy and agency. And what happened every day when they would finish what they thought was finished, they had done enough in the genre we were focused on, I would watch her and she would go into the second notebook. And I thought, I wish I would have opened that as an option for more students, because it would have been
Yeah.
really helpful for me as a teacher to gauge, their strengths across and the transfer. Because I think that's another notion we miss with writing. How are children transferring the kernels of what we're trying to impart, whether it's in a conference or a whole group lesson, across different pieces of writing?
Yeah. Yeah. And the Writer's Notebook is near and dear to my heart, as you probably know. So I think that, I think, just to go back to like a definition of, I don't have like a soundbite, but I think greenbelt writing is pure choice writing.
That's why I love it.
And yeah, it's just kind of, it's open. And, and I think that there's a lot of aspects to that. Like, I think that some kids, especially older kids who have been used to being given topics. I mean, this is a pejorative verb, but I'll just say they've been spoon-fed topics for
Yes.
years. So then, therefore, when you sort of say you can write what they want, a lot of the kids those are muscles that have atrophied for them. So we may have to show them how to read the world and read their lives, and how something small could also be a rich topic, potentially. So I think that choice, once we give the kids the choice, it may need a little bit of nurturing to get it going. Olivia, I was thinking about something, like about, I was watching parts of the whole Saturday Night Live. They did a documentary of the four of them. I've watched a little bit of them, and God knows I'm not a comedian, but one of the things in improvisation, like if you and I were doing improv on the stage, and is that if you started with some like outlandish premise, like the way I need to respond is yes, and like in other words, like no matter what you come up with, I've got to sort of build off of it.
Build on it. Yeah.
And I think what I'm trying to say is that when teachers see kids starting to do their greenbelt writing, I really think that we should try to take that same stance. There may be times when we have to draw a line, but I think we should try to say yes as much as we can. Like I'll tell you this one quick story. I was in a classroom, and the teacher and I, we met before the school, and I was going to do a mini lesson and helping the kids write about a big issue, using a narrative lead. Um, and I think I do talk about this a little bit in my book, Joyride. So I gave my little mini lesson, and then but I asked the kids to say, I wanted to meet them all and ask them what they were going to write about. So the first kid said, I'm Melissa. I'm writing about how zoos are bad. Next kid, Ramona. I'm writing about how zoos are good. And then after about the fourth kid talking about zoos, I looked at the teacher and she said, yeah, well, what we do is for the first, time that they write in a genre, in a unit, we all do the same topic. So I said, okay. So then it was really awkward. We had to keep going, even though I knew every kid was going to be writing about zoos one way or
Zeus.
another.
Oh my God.
It was like kind of inauthentic.
Yeah.
So then I sent the kids off to write. I conferred with this one boy, and we talked about the idea of a narrative lead. He liked the idea, and so I said, he tried one, and it was good. It was a good lead. So I said, "Do you think that would where would you think that might go in your piece?" Like, and he said, "Yeah, well, maybe." I said, "Where would it go? Would it go at the beginning or the middle, or the end?" He says, "I think it would go at the beginning." So then I said, "Well, I wonder what would happen if you tried that." And he started to put it in, but then he said, "But I can't do that." I said, "Well, why not?" He says, "Because the first paragraph has to include all these things in it." So now you're telling the kids what genre to write in,
How to write.
persuasion. You're
Yeah.
telling them what topic to write in, zoos, and you're telling the kids how to approach the topic. We talk about some of these programs talk about the arc of the writing. To me, when you get to that point, it's not really a writing workshop anymore. It's just basically assigning kids writing.
Right.
And I think that, so Greenbelt writing in my book Joyride is kind of a reaction against that. It's basically, it's like, I just thought of this as kind of maybe an unfortunate metaphor, but it's like jumping into the lifeboats with a few things that you can grab onto and save. Let's just basically, because these kids need some experience writing about what matters to them. Just like we know that the kids are going to have a better chance of becoming good readers if they go to the library, pick a book that they like or an author they love in a genre they love to read, maybe a subject matter. Somehow, I look at the writing classroom should be more of that. There should be more kids choosing things that they really are interested in.
And I would say that my older son, who is going off to college in the fall, he now looks back with fond memories. It didn't feel fond to him always when he was little, but we had a writer's workshop in our house all the time. We had Greenbelt writing happening all the time, publishing celebrations, writing stuck up all over, because I believe that children have to see themselves as writers to get their voice out in the world. I saw a photograph yesterday. It bothered me because I tend to have lots of ideas. I don't spend enough time writing to capture those ideas. And it had a faucet with the word ideas over it with just water flooding, but then writing, and then the bucket of capturing the ideas. And I think for our children, if they can see that, whether it's on Post-its, I live in a world of Post-its, lots of Post-its everywhere, but then I capture them. They need to see that the only way to get their voices out there is to be able to write in a way that others can hear and receive it. But that takes lots of practice and time. And I wish more teachers were open to letting kids play. That's what writing workshop was to me. It was a workbench. It was a time to play and develop voice. What are you trying to convey to your readers? And then how are you going to convey? So a lot of the work I did as a coach and teacher, especially third grade and beyond to middle and high school, I stopped governing a genre or a mode of writing as soon as the kids jumped into drafting. They could choose any genre that they wanted to convey their idea in. And I think we could do that too. It's just, again, gaining and remembering we know this work. Joyride was a calibration for me, and seeing you present again, it was a reminder. No, I know what I believe to be true. I just feel like we've had it slowly just drained out of us or chipped away. And at this point in the world, we need to find more opportunities for joy. Um, I
Yeah.
love the slide you had up. I wrote it down. A greenbelt thrives on benign neglect. And that quote, it really struck me because, what does that mean to you in the context of writing?
Well, one thing I just want to respond to that. Yeah, in terms of like for the writing teacher's point of view, I mean, teachers are under the gun, and I understand it. There's always curricular add-ons and demands,
Right.
and many teachers have told me that nobody ever takes anything away from them. So it feels like, oh, you have to do this too, do this too. Yeah, and so I feel for teachers. I don't think it's a great time to be in education right now for many people in many situations. Not everywhere, but um, I think that I don't want them to look at this kind of writing as pressure for like, oh God, more work for them. The kids go away, they write the 30-page piece. Now what I got to do? The way I look at it is you don't have to do anything except to affirm it the way the teacher you said before. I think you can show interest in it, to laugh, or not even to laugh, but to respond humanly. Whatever, if it's a sad piece, um, you know, just to respond in whatever seems to be appropriate, and to validate what they're bringing to it. Many of us got into education. I won't speak for everybody because we're interested in children. I mean, just to get a little bit, you know, nerdy here. If you go back into the roots of writing workshop, the philosophical roots were people like Rousseau, the Romantics, not romantic like a rom-com, but the Romantics who really were interested in childhood as his own thing, not as like little miniature adults, but like kids are just like they're just quirky, you know, and so I'll just like share like my own kind of biases. I'm interested in writing more for expression than for achievement. I mean, I know writing's important. I know writing is not going away in this world that we're in, and it'll be looked at for colleges and stuff like that. But I also want kids to be able to express themselves. And one of the things about writing that I love is that you get to know the kids
Yes.
really well. You get to know them in a special way, and that's why grandparents put their kids their grand or parents put them up in the refrigerator
Everywhere.
because
Yeah.
look at the way look at the way he drew
Yeah.
that person or that
Yes.
dinosaur or whatever. It's
Yes.
it's interesting how that's the way they see the world. So I think that there's got to be room for that. And the other thing is, in terms of writing, we don't talk about this too much, is that a lot of times I think in the old days, people thought of writing as a way to prove what you know. Like I can write about, the causes of the Civil War, and I can write a little essay and slavery and this and that, the other thing. And that shows that I understand it. But actually, writing is also a way to discover what you have to say.
Yes.
There's a real interesting thing about when you write, it's generative. You just start to, things spark and you make connections, and sometimes like what you write isn't exactly what you thought you'd write. So I think that that's valuable too. Um, and, I just think that, one of the things that I'm looking at now is how can we help kids develop that identity? Like, I'm a writer.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be something that just a couple of kids in the class have that identity. Oh, she's a writer and he's a writer. But I'm really trying to espouse ways that we can have all kids adopt that identity.
Well, and so I wanted to wrap. Um, there was a quote that it struck me, and it's on page 41. A greenbelt doesn't have to be managed. Indeed, its very wildness is its virtue. The same principle holds true for greenbelt writing. We need to recognize its value, establish its sovereignty, and then get out of the way. Leave it alone. And Ralph, I I am so impressed with your photography, and I have shown my children. It is inspiring, and I think that's another lens that you can see what someone values and how you can slow down and take the time to see the world around you and capture moments. And just the fact that you could put a photo up in a room of hundreds of people and inspire such a beautiful array of response in writing, and that you
Yeah.
carved a time for us to see and to remind ourselves that we are all writers. I think that was sacred too, because we have to practice this as teachers. We have to practice this as grown-ups. Whether you think you're a writer or not, do your own assignments, try your writing to see how inspired you feel too.
Yeah, that's a big one, and I think that what you got me thinking is that it wouldn't be such a crazy idea for teachers to bring in some of their own greenbelt writing, their own scribblings, or I have an idea for a picture book. I've been teaching for 15 years, and I've read all these picture books, and I had this idea, and I'm gonna work on it. That and you know, so I do think that the teacher is a huge mentor there. And I want to go back to what you said about like the quote about the benign neglect and just kind of leaving it unmanicured.
Yeah.
I think that I when I wrote this book, I almost called it feral writing. And a feral animal is an animal that's like a domestic animal that goes back to its wild state. And people joke about, oh, I've got a feral child. I mean, I'm sure some of your friends have said that. Maybe you have one yourself. But I think that it wouldn't be such a bad thing to bring a little bit of wildness back into the writing. When kids do this kind of writing, they'll often pull off of pop culture and things like that. But that's the world that they live in, and it's a way that they can keep track of that. So if I'm teaching and my kids are been invited to do this kind of greenbelt writing, I would not make it a responsibility to read it all, but I would be interested in it. I would try to, like, in my own way, just kind of be maybe nearby and let the kids know that I'm interested. And a lot of times if you do that, they'll share with you. And just see what you can learn about the kids. Olivia, one of the things that I'm doing right now for this new book is I'm going to borrow an idea that I got from a teacher, that I'm going to ask kids to think of a recent writing experience and to draw a picture that represents that. And what this teacher that did it before, she noticed was that sometimes the kids are really far from the teacher, sometimes they're closer. Sometimes the kids were smiling, sometimes the kids are frowning. And they have little talk bubbles sometimes that are very revealing. So, I mean, you have to be, when you look at that kind of thing, you'll get a lot of insight into your kids. And I also just want to say that I think that when you and I think about writing, and maybe the people who are listening to this podcast, we often think of like sentences on the page. But I think the whole concept of writing is sort of expanding. Kids write in different ways now. So you mentioned comics. The kids are going to do a lot of drawings.
Yes.
They're going to, and I think that sometimes we tend to, I mean, I'm a language person, but I think that sometimes kids will express themselves a lot of feelings and meaning through their drawings as well. And maybe that's part of the reason that I'm drawn to the photography myself, in my own world.
Well, I can't thank you enough for this book. I think it came out in 2017. I pulled it off of my bookshelf to reread it again, because your work, it's an iterative, I can't say the word. Your work is an iterative process for me as a teacher and learner. And so I can go back to some of your books written years ago, but because I'm a different human and I have so many different lived experiences,
Sure.
I can read it with a different lens.
Yep.
And I'm just grateful that you're focusing on the joy, and this idea of greenbelt writing, I think, can be everything for our children right now that feel like their choice is so boxed in. So thank you for the work you continue to do.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, take care, Rick.
I've enjoyed talking to you.
Same. Scholutions Coaching and Teaching Strategies is created, produced, and edited by me, Olivia Wall. Thank you to my older son, Benjamin, who created the music playing in the background. You can follow and listen to Scholutions wherever you get your podcasts. or subscribe to never miss an episode and watch on YouTube. Thank you to my guest, Ralph Fletcher, for sharing how Greenbelt Writing provides essential creative space for students to develop their authentic writing voice. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email at solutionspodcast@gmail.com. Let me know what resonated most with you from my conversation with Ralph. Tune in every Monday for the best research-backed coaching and teaching strategies you can apply right away to better the lives of the children in your care. And stay tuned for my bonus episodes every Friday, where I'll reflect and share connections to what I learned from the guests that week. See you then.